Katz, dating coach for smart, strong, successful women, and your personal trainer for love. Welcome back to the Love You podcast, where you're going to learn everything you need to know about dating, relationships, sex, and men to help you understand men and find love. I want to begin today's podcast with one of the worst pieces of dating advice that has ever been given. Be yourself. Just be yourself. It's popular advice, to be sure. And in saying that, I'm certainly not saying that you should pretend to be someone else. And sometimes when people go to extremes, right? When I say don't be yourself, it doesn't literally mean don't be yourself. It's just that be yourself in and of itself is not particularly good advice. And so, the premise of today's podcast is really that dating is a skill, and and like any skill, it is a skill that can be learned and improved upon, that can make a tangible difference in your life. And obviously, I believe it. I'm a dating coach, so it would be weird to suggest that dating is not a skill, right? Otherwise, what am I doing here? I'm teaching you something that cannot be improved upon. So telling someone to be themselves is not going to help someone develop that skill set, and that's the weakness of that kind of advice, right? Experts often give this kind of advice. Now, the word expert is a loaded term anyway, and I'm very conscious of it. Maybe I'll do an entire episode about it one day. But anybody could call themselves an expert, and I count myself among them. My story's been told. Former screenwriter who was prolific at writing, online dating slut, turned it into a career. So when I talk to people who are, PhDs in psychology and they've been practicing for 30 years and they've written medical papers, and I obviously have great respect for those folks. So there's all sorts of different kinds of expertise, and certainly in the internet world, you can go build a blog, call yourself an expert, and ta-da, you're an expert. No one can tell you otherwise. I think real expertise takes a lot more time, and just because I gave my opinion when I was 31 doesn't mean I haven't learned a whole ton now that I'm 43. So when you hear experts say be yourself, they're giving you non-advice, right? They're giving you lazy information that's designed to make you feel good, because the implication is that there's nothing that's ever wrong with you, and there's nothing that you can do better. It's just everybody else. What do you learn from that? I mean, what's the teaching tool? It's like telling you, digest your food, breathe air. Okay, you're going to try harder to digest your food or breathe air because some expert told you to? It's non-advice. The next problem I have with just be yourself is that I'm a coach for women. The men you date, the ones that you don't like, they're being themselves. Oh yeah, the guys who send you dick pics, they're being themselves. The guys who never pay, they're being themselves. The guys who don't know how to communicate, the guys who have anger issues, bitterness towards women, the guys who only text, the guys who sleep with you and never call you again, they're being themselves. So how good is just be yourself as far as dating advice goes? You have a whole swath of people out there who are doing the best that they can, presumably, but their best isn't always good enough. So it's so easy to look at what men do wrong. If you're a woman, right? And I'll go back to this frequently, but since you date men in general, men are the problems. If you dated women, women would be the problem. Right? So the problem is not intrinsic to the gender, it's who you date. Those are the people who are the ones who are hurting you, who are violating your trust, who are disappointing you. Right? But if you asked a whole bunch of men about their dating experiences, they'd have just as many bad dating experiences you did. Right? Courtesy of women. Right? But that doesn't mean that you're the problem or that all women are the problem. But there are women who hurt men in ways that men hurt you. So since we could acknowledge that there's tons of dating advice that we can give to guys that would make them better dates, right? Guys are particularly clueless, right? Since we know that men can improve their date performance, I think it stands to reason that women can as well. Finally, be yourself is what got you here. And again, I don't say that. I'm not trying to bite the hand that feeds me. You never want to slam your audience, but be yourself is what led you to this point where you're watching this video, or you're reading my blog, or you're on my newsletter, or you're in my Love You program. And so we're dealing with shades, we're dealing with nuance. When I suggest that being yourself isn't in and of itself enough, I'm saying that there could be a more confident, self-aware, improved version of you. Not that you have to deny basically who you are, right? And again, by way of a short story, when I was in my 20s and I was dating for the first time as an adult, again, I'm equally complicit in this. I had no chivalry skills. I come from Russian immigrant grandparents. They didn't teach my dad chivalry. I didn't know you were supposed to wait until everybody sat down to eat until I was in college and people made fun of me, right? I wasn't taught about the rules of, walking on the proper side of the street or opening doors, or right. I didn't know the rules that guys are supposed to pay for first dates, and so as a result, I was a lot of people's bad date. That's hard to admit. I learned that perception is reality, and it doesn't matter if I had justifications for being the way I was, if I came by it honestly, if I was a good person inside. If I went on a date and I didn't pick up the check, someone thought I was cheap. So whether I thought I was cheap, whether I had a good rationale for it, it didn't really matter. Dating was a skill, and it was a skill that I didn't have, and it was a skill that I had to acquire. When I was dating, I talked about myself too much. I didn't know the value of listening and asking questions and making other people valued. I acted like I was on stage. I performed. And sometimes I got away with the performance, right? And sometimes people found it insufferable. And you have to go through that process and unfortunately get feedback to learn these kind of things. Trouble is, most of us don't get that kind of feedback, right? I was a glutton for punishment, right? I did this, I did online dating. People try online dating for 2-3 months and then they quit. I did it for 10 years. And just by persevering, I learned so much about women and dating and online dating, and of course myself. Again, dating is just holding up a mirror to you where you get to see who you are and how you're perceived and what your flaws are. Now, just because someone says something about you doesn't mean they're right. But if people repeatedly say it about you, if you get the same feedback over and over, you got to be sort of blind not to give it some measure of credence. And so I want you to think of dating as no different than dancing or golf, computer programming, knitting, whatever it is that you do. There is a skill to it. Right? There's something that you can do. There's something that you can do better if you got more feedback. And it's in your best interest to get better at it, because otherwise you become convinced that it is fundamentally flawed or it sucks. Right? Golf sucks if you can't play golf. Office politics are terrible if you're not good at navigating office politics, that kind of thing. So yes, dating is going to suck unless you realize that being yourself isn't in and of itself enough, and that you start to acquire the skill of getting better at dating. And hopefully that's what I'm here for. So when we come back from the break, I'm going to tell you how to get good at this without having to go on 300 dates. This is the Love You Podcast. I'm Marc Katz.